Wade Langston rode up to his newly purchased cabin expecting to find empty rooms and dust-covered furniture. Instead, smoke curled from the chimney, and a woman sat on his front porch as if she belonged there. She looked at him with eyes that held no surprise, no guilt, no explanation, just a strange familiarity. As though she had been waiting for someone exactly like him. The deed in his saddlebag proved he owned every plank of wood, every stone of the foundation. Yet when he dismounted and approached, she didn't move to leave or offer any excuse for her presence. She simply studied him with the quiet intensity of someone measuring a man's character. "You must be the new owner," she said, her eyes taking in his travel-worn clothes and the careful way he kept his hand near his weapon. Not the words of someone caught trespassing, but the calm observation of someone who had been expecting this moment. She stood gracefully, brushing dust from her worn dress, and extended her hand as if welcoming him to her home. "I'm Ivy Shepherd. I've been keeping this cabin ready." The possessive way she said, "this cabin," suggested she knew something he didn't. Some detail that would change everything he thought he understood about his purchase. But the most unsettling part wasn't her presence, or her calm acceptance of his arrival. It was the way she looked at him, as if measuring something beyond his appearance, as if his arrival fulfilled some long-held expectation she had been carrying. "There's something you need to know about this place," she continued, her voice carrying the weight of secrets that ran deeper than property lines or legal documents. "My family made a promise about this land, a promise I've been waiting 20 years to keep." Wade stared at the woman who claimed to be keeping his cabin ready, his hand instinctively moving toward the pistol at his side. 20 years. That would put her promise back to when she was barely more than a child. The math didn't add up, and neither did her calm demeanor in the face of his obvious confusion. "Miss Shepherd," he said carefully, "I bought this property fair and square from Harrison Mills in Silver Creek. Paid full price with my own money. There's no mention of any family arrangements or promises in the deed." He pulled the folded document from his jacket, holding it between them like a shield. "This paper says I own everything from the creek bed to the ridge line." Ivy nodded, as if she expected this exact response. "Harrison Mills." She spoke the name with something that might have been pity. "Did he tell you why he was selling? Why a man would part with the most beautiful piece of land in 3 counties for half what it's worth?" Wade's jaw tightened. He had wondered about the low price, but Mills had seemed eager to sell, claiming he needed to move east for business. Now, standing in front of this mysterious woman who knew his name and spoke of family promises, those suspicions crystallized into certainty that he had been deceived. "Harrison's father bought this land from mine 35 years ago," Ivy continued, settling back onto the porch step as if she had all the time in the world. "But there were conditions, agreements that weren't written down because they were matters of honor, not law." The way she said honor struck Wade like a physical blow. He had come west to escape men who had no concept of the word. Men who had destroyed his life back in Missouri through lies and betrayal. The idea that he might have unknowingly become part of another deception made his stomach turn. "My father promised that one of his blood would always live on this land," Ivy said, her eyes never leaving his face. "That we would tend it, protect it, keep it safe until the right person came along. Someone worthy of what this place really offers." Wade felt the hairs on his neck rise. The way she emphasized worthy suggested some kind of test, but he couldn't imagine what criteria a woman living alone in the mountains would use to judge him. More troubling was her certainty that he might be this worthy person, when they had never met before this moment. "What exactly are you protecting here, Miss Shepherd?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Ivy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That depends entirely on whether you're the man I've been waiting for." She stood and moved toward the cabin door, her hand resting on the latch. "But I should warn you, Wade Langston. The last 3 men who tried to claim this place without understanding its true nature." She paused, her smile fading completely. "They didn't fare well." Wade pushed past Ivy and stepped into the cabin, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. What he saw made him freeze in the doorway. The place was immaculate, furnished with care and attention that spoke of years of habitation. A woman's touch was evident everywhere, from the carefully arranged wildflowers on the table to the neatly folded quilts on the bed. This wasn't the empty shell he had expected to purchase. "You've been living here," he said, turning to face her. It wasn't an accusation, simply a statement of the obvious. "How long?" "Since I was 16, Ivy replied, closing the door behind them. "After my father died and left me alone on the mountain." Wade walked to the stone fireplace where a small fire crackled with fresh wood. Above the mantel hung 3 different hats, each belonging to a different man, each showing signs of hard use and sudden abandonment. He lifted one down, a black felt hat with a silver band, and examined the bullet hole that had torn through the crown. The previous owners, he asked. Ivy moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the mountain air in her hair, the faint scent of pine and something uniquely her own. Thomas Barrett was the first. Came here 2 years after my father's death, claiming Mills had sold him the property. He was a hard man, used to taking what he wanted without asking permission. Wade set the hat back on its peg. His attention now focused entirely on her story. The casual way she spoke of Barrett's fate suggested violence, but her steady voice betrayed no fear or remorse. Barrett tried to force me off the land, she continued. Said a woman had no business living alone in the mountains. Said I was probably luring men to their deaths for their money and belongings. A slight smile crossed her lips, but it held no warmth. He wasn't entirely wrong about the deaths part. The admission should have alarmed Wade, should have sent him backing toward the door with his hand on his weapon. Instead, he found himself stepping closer, drawn by the contradiction between her delicate appearance and the steel in her voice. There was something about Ivy Shepherd that called to a part of him he had thought long dead, the part that recognized strength when he saw it. What happened to Barrett? Wade asked. He fell, Ivy said simply. The mountain paths can be treacherous for men who don't respect the land or the people who know it best. Wade nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a current. Barrett hadn't just fallen. He had been helped along his way, and likely deserved whatever fate had found him on these treacherous paths. And the other 2 hats? Ivy moved to the window, gazing out at the peaks that surrounded their small valley. Similar stories. Men who came with legal papers and cruel intentions. She turned back to face him, her eyes searching his face for something he couldn't identify. But you're different, aren't you, Wade? You didn't come here to take. You came here to hide. Wade felt the weight of her perception settle on him like a heavy coat. Ivy had seen through his careful facade in minutes, reading the truth he had hoped to bury along with his past. He turned away from her penetrating gaze, pretending to examine the cabin's sturdy construction while gathering the courage to respond. Running and hiding aren't the same thing, he said finally, running his fingers along the smooth wooden walls. Sometimes a man just needs space to think without people asking questions. Ivy moved closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. What kind of questions are you avoiding, Wade? The directness of her inquiry should have angered him. Instead, it felt like a relief. For months he had carried the burden of his secrets alone, deflecting curiosity with vague answers and quick departures from towns that grew too familiar. Here, with this strange woman who guarded her own mysteries, he felt an unexpected urge to unburden himself. I killed 2 men in Missouri, he said, the words falling from his lips before he could stop them. They deserved it, but their families had money and influence, the kind that buys judges and sheriff badges. Ivy nodded as if he had confirmed something she already suspected. Self-defense? They called it murder. Wade's hands clenched into fists at the memory. Samuel and Marcus Whitmore, brothers who thought every woman in 3 counties belonged to them, whether she agreed or not. They cornered a girl named Helen outside the church social. His voice grew rough with remembered rage. I couldn't stand by and watch. So you intervened. I tried talking first. Offered to escort the girl home safe. Wade laughed bitterly. The Whitmores didn't appreciate being told no by a ranch hand. Samuel drew on me first, but Marcus was faster than I expected. If I hadn't been lucky. Ivy placed her hand on his arm, the touch sending an unexpected current through his body. Her fingers were calloused from hard work but gentle in their pressure. Lucky isn't the word I'd use. Skilled, maybe. Determined. A man who protects the innocent isn't lucky, Wade. He's necessary. Wade looked down at her hand on his arm, marveling at how such a simple touch could quiet the storm that had raged in his chest for months. The judge didn't see it that way. Neither did the sheriff who owed his position to Whitmore money. So you left. I ran. The admission tasted bitter, but saying it aloud to someone who didn't flinch at his confession felt liberating. Took my horse, my guns, and what money I had saved. Figured I'd find someplace remote enough that Whitmore influence couldn't reach. Ivy smiled, and this time the expression reached her eyes. You chose well. This mountain has a way of protecting people who deserve protection. She moved toward the cabin door, pausing with her hand on the latch. Would you like to see what you really bought, Wade Langston? The reason my family made that promise? Ivy led Wade along a narrow path that wound behind the cabin and up into the dense pine forest. The trail was barely visible, worn smooth by years of careful use rather than heavy traffic. She moved with the confident stride of someone who knew every rock and route, while Wade found himself studying the graceful way her body navigated the challenging terrain. "Most men who come here never see past the cabin," she said over her shoulder. "They look at the building, measure the cleared land, count the trees they could cut for timber. They never think to explore what lies beyond." Wade followed her higher into the mountains, noting how the air grew thinner and cleaner with each step. The sounds of civilization faded completely, replaced by the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of hawks circling overhead. This was the kind of solitude he had dreamed of during those desperate nights fleeing Missouri. After 20 minutes of steady climbing, Ivy stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall of granite. But as Wade approached, he realized she stood beside a narrow opening in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. "This is what my father protected," she said, gesturing toward the hidden entrance. "What his father protected before him. What I've been protecting since I was old enough to understand its value." Wade squeezed through the opening behind her and emerged into a natural cathedral carved from living rock. Sunlight streamed through gaps high above, illuminating a scene that took his breath away. A crystal-clear pool of water filled the center of the hidden chamber, fed by an underground spring that bubbled up from depths unknown. But it wasn't the water that made him gasp. The walls glittered with veins of silver so pure they seemed to glow in the filtered sunlight. Not just traces or small deposits, but thick seams that ran throughout the entire chamber. Wade had seen enough mining operations to recognize wealth when he encountered it, and this hidden cavern contained more precious metal than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. "My God," he whispered, running his fingers along one of the silver veins. "This is a fortune." "Several fortunes," Ivy agreed. "Enough to buy entire territories, enough to make whoever controls it one of the wealthiest people in the country." She moved to the edge of the pool, kneeling to cup the pure water in her hands. "It's also enough to bring every greedy man for 1,000 miles running when word gets out." Wade understood immediately why her family had made promises about protecting this land. In the wrong hands, knowledge of this silver deposit would transform their peaceful mountain valley into a hellish mining camp filled with desperate men willing to kill for a share of the wealth. "The promise," he said, the pieces finally falling into place. Ivy nodded, her eyes reflecting the silver light from the walls. "To keep this secret until someone proved worthy of the responsibility." She stood and faced him directly. "Someone who would protect it, rather than exploit it. Someone who understands that some things are more valuable than money." Wade felt the weight of her words, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the valley below. Ivy pressed herself against the cavern wall, her face draining of color as the sound of multiple horses grew louder in the valley below. Wade moved instinctively to shield her, drawing his pistol in one smooth motion as he peered through the narrow entrance. "How many men know about this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one living," Ivy replied, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. Barrett suspected something valuable was hidden up here, but he died before he could prove it. The others never got close enough to matter. Wade counted at least 6 distinct sets of hoofbeats echoing off the valley walls. Too many for coincidence, too organized for casual travelers. His blood ran cold as he recognized the methodical pattern of their approach. Professional hunters, the kind who tracked men for money rather than justice. "They're not here for the silver," he said grimly. "They're here for me." Ivy grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "The Whitmore family?" "Has to be." Wade holstered his weapon and began backing toward the hidden chamber's depths, pulling Ivy with him. "They must have tracked me to Silver Creek, found out about the land purchase from Mills." The sound of voices drifted up from the cabin below, harsh and demanding. Wade couldn't make out individual words, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. He watched Ivy's face transform from fear to something harder, more dangerous. "They're in my home," she said, her voice carrying the same cold edge he had heard when she spoke of Barrett's fate. "Our home," Wade corrected without thinking, then froze as he realized what he had said. The possessive word had slipped out naturally, as if he had already accepted that this place belonged to both of them. Ivy's eyes widened at his correction, but before she could respond, a man's voice bellowed from the valley. "Wade Langston, we know you're up there somewhere. Samuel Whitmore sends his regards." Wade's jaw clenched. Samuel Whitmore was supposed to be dead, shot through the chest during their confrontation outside the church. Either he had survived somehow, or his family was using his name to add insult to their vengeance. "There's another way out of here," Ivy whispered, pointing toward a narrow crack in the far wall that Wade hadn't noticed before. "It leads to the north face of the mountain. We could disappear into the high country." "We?" Wade studied her face, seeing determination replace fear. "You don't have to run from my troubles, Ivy." She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body despite the cool air of the cavern. "This mountain has protected my family for 3 generations. Now it's going to protect you too." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with a certainty that surprised them both. That's what the promise meant. Wade, not just guarding the silver, but guarding the people worthy of its protection. Below them, the sound of splintering wood suggested the hunters had grown tired of waiting for answers. Wade pressed his back against the silver-veined wall, pulling Ivy close as the sounds of destruction echoed up from the cabin below. The hunters were methodically tearing apart everything she had built, everything that represented years of solitary survival on this mountain. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair, breathing in the scent of pine and wildflowers that seemed to be part of her very being. "They're destroying your home because of me." Ivy tilted her face up toward his, and Wade found himself staring into eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. "A home is more than wooden walls and furniture," she said softly. "It's the people who matter to you, the places where you feel safe to be yourself." The intimacy of their position, pressed together in the silver-lit cavern while danger prowled below, created a tension that had nothing to do with fear. Wade became acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, the rise and fall of her breathing, the way her fingers still clung to his hand. "Ivy," he began, but she placed her free hand against his chest, silencing him. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Wade strained his ears and caught what she had noticed. The voices below were growing closer, moving up the mountain path. The hunters had found the trail. "How long before they reach the entrance?" he asked. 10 minutes, maybe less." Ivy moved toward the narrow crack in the back wall, gesturing for him to follow. "But there's something you need to understand before we run." Wade hesitated, caught between the urgent need to escape and the gravity in her voice. "What? If we leave through that passage, we'll emerge on the far side of the mountain. We'll be safe, but we can never come back." Her eyes reflected the silver light like captured starlight. "The hunters will find this cavern eventually. They'll strip the mountain bare and destroy everything my family protected." The choice she was offering hit Wade like a physical blow. Run and survive, but abandon the promise her family had kept for generations. Stay and fight impossible odds to protect a secret that wasn't even his to keep. "There's a third option," he said, an idea forming as he spoke. "We make them think they found what they came for." Ivy frowned, not understanding. Wade holstered his weapon and moved to one of the silver veins, drawing his knife to scrape loose a handful of the precious metal. "They're here for me, but they're greedy men. If they think they've stumbled onto something valuable enough to make them rich, they'll forget about you and focus on the silver," Ivy finished, her eyes widening as she grasped his plan. "Exactly. We let them find enough to whet their appetite, then lead them away from the main deposit." Wade pocketed the silver flakes. "They'll follow the promise of easy wealth, and we disappear into the high country until they give up the chase." Ivy stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. The gesture was so tender, so trusting, that Wade felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. "You're willing to risk your life to protect my family's promise," she said wonderingly. Before he could answer, the sound of boots scraping against rock echoed from the cavern entrance. The hunters had found them. Wade pressed the silver flakes into Ivy's palm and whispered urgently, "When I step out, you slip through the back passage and circle around. They'll be focused on me." "I'm not leaving you to face 6 armed men alone," Ivy whispered back, her fingers closing around the precious metal. "You're not leaving me. You're completing the plan." Wade gripped her shoulders gently but firmly. "They need to see you running with something valuable, something worth chasing." The scrape of boots grew louder as the hunters navigated the narrow entrance. Wade could hear their harsh breathing, the clink of spurs and weapons as they squeezed through the opening one by one. "Trust me," he said, then stepped into the silver-lit chamber with his hands raised in apparent surrender. "Well, well," drawled a familiar voice. "Wade Langston, as I live and breathe." Wade's blood chilled as he recognized Marcus Whitmore stepping into the cavern's glow. The man he thought he had killed in Missouri stood before him, very much alive, though a vicious scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth where Wade's bullet had torn through flesh and bone. "Hello, Marcus. You're looking well for a dead man." Marcus smiled, the expression twisted by his scarred face. "Takes more than a lucky shot to put down a Whitmore." He gestured to his 5 companions, all hard-faced men with the look of professional killers. "But I didn't come all this way just for revenge. Imagine my surprise when we tracked you to this little hideout and discovered what you've been protecting." Wade's heart hammered as Marcus's eyes swept the silver-veined walls, taking in the gleaming wealth that surrounded them. The plan was working too well. The greed in Marcus's expression was unmistakable, but so was his intelligence. This wasn't a man who would be easily fooled. "Quite a claim you staked out here, Langston. Must have cost you everything you had." "It did," Wade replied truthfully. A sound like falling pebbles echoed from the back of the cavern, followed by a woman's gasp. Marcus's attention snapped toward the noise, and Wade saw Ivy's silhouette disappearing through the hidden crack in the wall. "Stop her!" Marcus barked. 2 of his men lunged toward the back passage, but Wade stepped sideways, blocking their path. "Let her go. She's just a local girl who was scared by your arrival." Marcus laughed coldly. Local girl carrying a handful of raw silver ore? He had seen what Wade hoped he wouldn't notice. "She's your partner in this little mining operation, isn't she?" Wade's mind raced. The plan was falling apart, but maybe he could still salvage it. "She knows these mountains better than anyone. If you want to find the main vein, you'll need her alive and cooperative." Marcus studied Wade's face for a long moment, then nodded to his men. "Follow her, but don't hurt her yet. We might need what's in her head." As the hunters squeezed through the narrow passage in pursuit of Ivy, Wade realized with growing dread that he had just sent the woman he was falling in love with straight into mortal danger. Wade waited until the last of Marcus's men disappeared through the passage before drawing his pistol and pressing it against Marcus's spine. "Your friends just made a fatal mistake." Marcus tensed but didn't turn around. "What mistake would that be?" "Following a woman who's lived on this mountain her entire life into terrain they don't know." Wade's voice carried grim satisfaction. "That passage doesn't lead to an escape route, Marcus. It leads to a 100-foot drop onto sharp rocks." The distant sound of men shouting in alarm echoed from somewhere beyond the cavern walls, followed by screams that cut off abruptly. Wade felt no satisfaction in the deaths, but he felt no regret either. Those men had come here to kill him and exploit what Ivy's family had protected for generations. Marcus spun around, his scarred face twisted with rage. "You son of a—" Wade's fist connected with Marcus's jaw before he could finish the curse, sending the man crashing into the silver-veined wall. Marcus slumped to the cavern floor, unconscious but breathing. "Wade!" Ivy's voice called from the main entrance. "Are you safe?" "It's over," Wade called back, then knelt beside Marcus to check his pulse. Still alive, but he would have a splitting headache when he woke up bound and gagged. Ivy appeared in the entrance, her dress torn and dirty, but her eyes bright with triumph. "The passage leads to a ledge overlooking the North Valley. I showed them the way down." Her smile held no remorse. Some lessons about respecting mountain folk need to be taught the hard way. Wade stood and moved toward her, amazed once again by the steel beneath her gentle exterior. "And Marcus? We'll wake up tied to a tree halfway down the mountain with enough water to last until the next travelers find him." Wade holstered his weapon and reached for the rope on his belt. "If he's smart, he'll head back to Missouri and tell everyone Wade Langston died in a mining accident." Together, they bound the unconscious Marcus and dragged him from the cavern. An hour later, they stood on the cabin's rebuilt porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Wade had used lumber from the hunters' abandoned supplies to repair the damage to Ivy's home, and the place looked more welcoming than ever. "So what happens now?" Ivy asked, settling beside him on the steps they had built together. Wade took her hand, marveling at how perfectly her fingers fit between his own. "Now I keep the promise your family made. We keep it together." He turned to face her fully. "If you'll have a fugitive turned mountain man as a partner." Ivy's smile outshone the sunset. "The promise was to protect this place until the right person came along, someone worthy of the responsibility." She lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles gently. "I think we found him." Wade pulled her closer, feeling the last of his restless, wandering spirit settle into perfect stillness. He had come to this mountain seeking solitude and found something infinitely more valuable. He had found home, purpose, and a woman strong enough to stand beside him against whatever challenges the future might bring. The silver would remain hidden, protected by two hearts that understood some treasures were worth more than wealth. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale of courage and destiny in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.